Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Aaron and this is the 6th installment in my Law of One series. In today's video, I'd like to tackle another fundamental topic that appears very often in the raw material, and that is the concept of love and light. Now, in virtually every session, Ra opens with the statement, "We greet you in the love and in the light of the one infinite creator." And it's very easy to sort of skip over this statement as being not particularly noteworthy since it's used so often. But in this video, I'd like to dive deep into this topic of the two fundamental aspects of the source's nature that make up all of creation: the feminine and masculine archetypes of God, love and light. In session 13, Ra explains the order of creation from its beginning. And although these steps were ultimately simultaneous, it is helpful to break them down sequentially so we can have a better understanding of how the universe was formed. So Ra states that the first known thing in creation was infinity. Following that, infinity became aware. After awareness, infinity focused itself into infinite energy. And this infinite energy is what we call love. Love is the essence of the Creator's essential nature. It is the feminine archetype of God that serves as the substance for all of creation. And it also serves as a kind of metaphysical gravity that pulls everything back into oneness again, which ultimately ends and then begins new universes for eternity. But creation could not be complete with just love alone, because without some means to know itself, love cannot truly express. So Ra states that following the metaphysical projection of love, there was its physical projection of light. Light is the masculine archetype of God that goes outwards into space and time and creates the entire physical illusion. Light represents wisdom, as wisdom illuminates the darkness of confusion into the light of understanding. So every universe, or as Ra calls them, octaves, begins through this explosion of light, and then over time, the gravity of love slowly pulls creation back into itself, into a single point, which then begins a new universe. And Ra actually equates every universe that is born through this push-pull of the masculine and feminine as the heartbeat of the one infinite creator. This is also why Ra often says love light and light love, because these two forces of the creator cannot exist independently. And so to speak of love is to imply light, and vice versa. In session 15, Ra states, "There is the same difference between love light and light love as there is between teach learning and learn teaching. Love light is the enabler, the power, the energy giver. Light love is the manifestation which occurs when light has been impressed with love." One of the more important concepts that Ra also touches on quite a bit in the Law of One is the idea of balancing. Essentially, the whole purpose of a soul's incarnation into physical reality is to purify itself from all distortions and become what Ra calls crystallized. This process of balancing the self continues on through all 7 densities of consciousness until the final merge back into the source is completed. So what the term balancing means is to achieve perfect equalization within oneself of both love and wisdom. This does not ultimately happen until the end of 6th density, as discussed in previous episodes. Ra explains that the energy centers of our body will develop blockages based upon thought and perception. If one is lacking in some form of self-love or wisdom, that distorted energy will have to manifest in one or more of the energy centers. So in order to unblock these energy centers to become more crystallized, we must heal these distortions within us. And although Ra doesn't talk much about the healing process, I'd like to focus most of this video on how healing work is done. The feminine and masculine also represent the positive and negative polarities, the positive being love and the negative being wisdom. This may be difficult to wrap your mind around because of the labels we have about positive and negative, but this does not mean that love is good and wisdom is evil. Remember, these polarities are simply archetypes in consciousness. Ra states again and again that both polarities are equally valid expressions of the Creator. So this does not mean that women are positive and men are negative. It means that the feminine is inherently service to others because love is always an outward movement and seeks only to give. And the masculine polarity is inherently service to self because wisdom seeks to know or to possess understanding for itself. To put this in a different light, we can see the inherent union of love and wisdom by looking at the traditional dynamic of romance. There's a reason that every love story between a man and a woman is virtually identical. The feminine wants to be pursued and adored by the masculine, and the masculine wants to pursue and adore the feminine. Every good romance movie shows a man who falls madly in love with a woman to the point that he will climb any mountain or swim across any ocean to have her. You never see a romance movie about a woman who climbs mountains to pursue a man who's lying on his silk bedsheets while he awaits her arrival. And the reason for this is because the masculine archetype seeks to possess the feminine, as wisdom seeks to understand love. Now, of course, since both polarities are equally valid, then any variation of them is also equally valid, such as female to female love or male to male. But for the sake of understanding the nature of each archetype, we look to the traditional dynamics of romance between a male and a female. Every person inherently contains the masculine and the feminine energies within them, regardless of what their biological gender is. And achieving balance within the self of both love and wisdom is crucial for spiritual evolution. So we see that the masculine finds its ultimate fulfillment in the feminine and feels that she is the entire reason for his existence. Wisdom serenades love like Romeo serenades Juliet, telling love how beautiful and sacred she is. Everything wisdom does is ultimately to point towards love as the reason for its existence. And the feminine archetype of love adores wisdom because in the light of wisdom, love is able to taste its own beauty and divinity, and therefore find its ultimate completion. Likewise, the only way the positive path can know itself is because of the contrast that the negative path provides. Without the negative path, the positive path could not exist either. The two work hand in hand to create the entire physical universe, as love is the substance of all things, and light is the order and structure of it. So now that we have a solid grasp on the function of these two archetypes, let's take a closer look at the feminine and masculine approaches towards inner healing or balancing. Most people are not aware of this, but there's actually two different approaches to doing shadow work, both of which are sort of complementary opposites of one another. So let's look first at the feminine approach towards spiritual healing, or what Ra calls balancing. The feminine is the creative force, power, emotion, and intuition. The feminine approach to balancing is solely through the feeling and transmuting of emotions through love. The feminine approach to shadow work involves going to the root of the negative emotion, feeling it completely, and allowing it to express itself. And instead of meeting it with resistance, to meet it with love and acceptance. In session 61, Ra states, "Balancing requires a meditative state in order for the work to be done. However, the balancing of sensation has to do with an analysis of the sensation with a special respect to any unbalanced leaning between the love and wisdom or the positive and the negative. Then, whatever is lacking in the balanced sensation is, as in all balancing, allowed to come into the being after the sensation is remembered and recalled in such detail as to overwhelm the senses." Allowing yourself to feel repressed emotions is a practice. And although the feminine approach is much more painful and intense than the masculine approach, it's also much more powerful and immediate. A single healing session has the potential to purify an old wound that has been festering for decades. So it takes time and practice and courage to develop the skill of locating these repressed emotions and memories and allowing yourself to feel them. But the power of the feminine approach is that once the root cause is located and healed, then everything downstream of it is healed as well. So now let's take a closer look at the masculine approach to balancing. The masculine is the organizing force that brings structure to form and energy. So the masculine approach to healing is the wisdom approach. The masculine approach dissolves illusions through the shifting of perception and acquiring of understanding. Knowing the mechanics of the mind allow one to see the unreality of thought, identification, and attachment, which naturally brings healing and balance to the self. Unlike the feminine, which seeks to heal repressed energy by feeling it out of existence, the masculine approach seeks to starve the energy out of existence. Although it is not as immediate and powerful as the feminine approach, the masculine is less intense and painful as it simply requires a permanent shift in perception or attitude towards thought, which slowly drains them of power. Once the illusions of the mind are understood, the light of wisdom returns to the soul and allows for peace and balance to be restored. So it could be said that the feminine heals through transmutation and the masculine heals through recognition. The feminine puts distortions to death by the guillotine, and the masculine puts distortions to death by 1,000 cuts. The difference can be most notably recognized by looking at the two greatest ascended masters who have incarnated on our planet, the Buddha and Christ. Christ represents the feminine archetype, or fourth density love. Christ's approach towards transcending the ego and realizing oneness was to feed the poor, take in the widow and the orphan, visit the prisoner, and love your enemies. Since the ego is entirely self-focused, Christ compelled his followers to overcome the ego through service to others, and spoke very little of the nature of illusion and perception. On the contrary, Buddha represents the masculine archetype, or fifth density wisdom. Buddha's approach towards transcending ego was to see its unreality, to question the concept of self, and strive towards achieving emptiness of mind. These two archetypes can also be seen clearly in world religions. The Western religion of Christianity devotes itself intensely to the love and worship of God, but has a severe deficiency in its wisdom or understanding of the divine. Much of Christian theology is self-contradictory and sorely lacks in wisdom and understanding. This results in a passionate hatred and rejection of those who believe differently. Although the Christian church claims to be based upon the love of God, it lacks the wisdom to understand what love really is. So the Christian and Catholic Church has committed some of the worst atrocities in human history, such as forcing clergy members to deny their sexual nature, resulting in the abuse of children, declaring holy wars on differing religions, and even burning its own saints alive for daring to think differently. This is the danger of the feminine archetype becoming unbalanced. When the passion and the zealousness of the feminine are not aimed in the right direction through wisdom, the most terrible forms of destruction can occur. The Eastern religions of Buddhism, Hinduism, and Taoism devote themselves almost exclusively to seeking the wisdom of the divine. The wisdom approach brings the balance and order that the Western religion deeply lacks. But Eastern religion also tends to lack in the department of love and worship of the divine, which has dangers of its own. When the purpose of wisdom is forgotten, then wisdom becomes its own purpose and creates an extreme spiritual narcissism. This is seen by many of the corrupted gurus who start off with good intentions, but develop an arrogance that turns into a dangerous spiritual ego. These corrupted gurus use their persona to manipulate women into sleeping with them by promising them enlightenment or spiritual ascension. They form cults that typically involve guru worship and free love, which is never actually about love, but allowing the sexual ego to run wild under the guise of spirituality. These cults can become dangerously narcissistic, as we've seen many times throughout recent history. Without the power of love to ground wisdom, it quickly becomes service to self-oriented and leads many well-intending seekers astray. Many people who follow the Eastern approach to spirituality become obsessed with acquiring knowledge and eventually learn themselves into an existential crisis. Without love being the ultimate purpose of acquiring wisdom, all meaning and purpose to life is lost. So as you can see, these two approaches both have their unique power and potential blind spots. But the real power comes from merging the two together. And I will admit, this does take some time and practice, as the two approaches are very different. But the rewards are well worth the effort. If you watch my channel, then you know that my personal approach is probably 80% towards the masculine side, as much of my content discusses the nature of illusion and perception and understanding the ego. Virtually all of my shadow work, or balancing, has been done via the masculine approach, by seeking to understand myself and the layers of misperception that create my suffering. And I've become so good at this over the years that anytime my ego gets triggered, I immediately go into self-inquiry and begin to break the thought down piece by piece until I can really see its unreality. And this brings me a peace and a clarity that causes me to just lose interest in these thoughts over time, and they slowly lose their ability to trigger me. But sometimes, when it comes to extremely painful traumas, such as past abuse or heartbreaks, for example, the emotional gravity is just far too intense for this method, and it requires me to take the feminine approach. Now, this may sound strange to those of you who are already masters of the feminine approach, but it took me quite some time to really learn how to feel my pain. I was so used to just rationalizing pain out of existence that it was really difficult for me to not conceptualize, but simply to feel. But this approach has saved me from some of the deepest traumas that I've experienced. So this is why I believe it is absolutely vital to learn and use both approaches to spiritual balancing. Because the masculine approach, for example, relies upon the need to understand why in order to heal. But sometimes you can get stuck in finding the answer to why your pain is an illusion. But the feminine approach is so powerful that it simply removes everything, even the need to know why. In this third density, balancing is a much more arduous process than in higher densities, as the soul begins its balancing here through the catalyst of suffering. But Ross states that balancing in higher densities looks very different than in ours, and it can be seen as a joyful reward for putting in the work required in this lifetime. So to close this video, I'll leave you with a little teaser that Ross shares about their current experience of achieving the perfect balance between love and wisdom. We seek the Creator upon a level of shared experience to which you are not privy, and rather than surrounding ourselves in light, we have become light. Our understanding is that there is no other material except light. Our rituals, as you may call them, are an infinitely subtle continuation of the balancing process which you are now beginning to experience. We seek now without polarity. Thus we do not invoke any power from without, for our search has become internalized as we become light love and love light. These are the balances we seek, the balances between compassion and wisdom, which more and more allow our understanding of experience to be informed that we may come closer to the unity with the one Creator which we so joyfully seek.